The consequential question for today is, what the fuck is going on with this new podcast? Royally Empowered. Contribution defined. The part played by a person or thing in bringing about a result or helping something advance. My name is Sean, aka Uncle Sean, and welcome to Sean Collins Contribution. Welcome to the Sean Collins Contribution. I'm your host, Sean. And before we get started with today's guest, I wanted to go over a couple of statistics. I got this information from convinceandconvert.com. And the first statistic I have comes from a survey of Americans 12 years age and older. 78% of Americans are now familiar with podcasts. And I think this statistic is interesting because the people I talk to and try and get them to become aware of podcasts, their initial questions are like, I don't know too much about podcasts. Can you tell me a little bit about it? So this statistic, 78% of Americans are now familiar, is familiar to me because I have to explain myself every time I talk to people who aren't familiar with podcasts. The next one is 57% of Americans have listened to podcasts or listened to a podcast. And that's a good thing because now starting my own new podcast, and as we talk to the guest of the new podcast, Royally Empowered next, we can get some insight on her starting her podcast also. And then the last one I want to go or bring to a light is the podcast listeners have grown within the last 3 years, almost 30%. So with that in mind, and thinking about those statistics, you would wonder why would some people want to start their own podcast? And because it's growing, it only makes sense for you to want to get in this wave while it is increasing and continue to increase before it declines. And so my guest I have today of the new podcast, she was born and raised in Philadelphia. She's a Christian who loves all things related to empowerment. She's dedicated to speaking, empowering, and inspiring men and women of her generation, millennial. She's a graduate of Little Flower Catholic High School for girls and has a BS degree in biology from Clark Atlanta University. She's the host of her own podcast, Royally Empowered. It's Christian faith-based, and she discusses all things mind, body, spirit, and a little culture. Let's welcome Jasmine Empress Rossi Ross.
Hello,
right?
Thank you for having me.
All righty. I hope I ain't mess you up too bad.
No,
Did I butcher it?
You did great.
Was that okay?
No,
you're not used to hearing introductions for yourself?
I'm not. No, I'm not. I'm used to giving introduction for myself.
Okay.
With my platform, but definitely not used to hearing it.
All right. How'd you feel about coming to this moment, knowing you're going to, instead of being on a podcast, now that I wanted you to be a guest on my podcast, how'd you feel about that? Like, what was going through your mind?
I was like, OMG, I can't believe it's happening. Like, it's something that I dreamt of, right? Collaborating with other people. But I never really knew how to introduce that to others that I might have been interested in, let alone being featured as a guest on someone else's podcast. And so honestly, I felt honored. I was excited immediately. I was just like, I literally went, oh my gosh. And like, I started tearing up and everything just because this is also, this is a new direction, but my lifestyle has changed. My positioning has changed when it comes to me establishing the platform that I have. And so because I got into this position, I decided to take a new direction. And I was just like, okay, God, like, I really want to move forward with this, but I want to make sure that I'm doing things in the way that God would desire me to. And he let me know that this time around would be very different. And so when I saw this, it was like, this is the different. Like, you're going to be invited to work with other people and share those experiences with others and be able to learn from someone like yourself. I know you shared with me that you've been doing your podcast, you're 5 episodes in, so now making connections in this very arena where previously I hadn't. And I was just, as you mentioned, I previously worked with someone else, but so yeah, I was really excited to sum it all up. I was over the moon excited to be invited.
And this is how I'm going through the same process you're going, also trying to grow the podcast. And this is basically networking also. So as you grow, and our link now that I have you on as a guest will continue to grow over the years, because we'll refer other people and, link up with each other, to kind of encourage each other to continue. Yeah, stay consistent and continue on what you're doing.
Yeah.
So with that, why, I have my own reasons on why I wanted to start a podcast, but I can, from personal experience, say that is definitely a lot of work. So what made you want to start your podcast?
Yes.
Knowing, well, maybe you didn't know how much work it would take, but now that you have a few shows in or a few episodes in, knowing the work it takes, why did you start and why would you want to still continue?
So I initially got the idea to launch a podcast back in 2017. And I decided that I wanted to try a different avenue than a YouTube channel, because I've always been the person, I don't want to do the popular thing all the time. And so because YouTube really started booming and like you said, some people would think, well, that's when you want to jump on because it's popping, but I want to do something different. And I honestly have been encouraged by other people who had seen my YouTube channel to start a podcast. And so that was where the idea initially started. And I was like, okay, I think that is, something that I could do. However, I delayed in doing that. Ideas were just popping up of different topics or things that I would want to cover. However, I wasn't brave enough to start at that time. And I just kept thinking, well, I need a co-host. I can't just do it by myself. Well, maybe I'm not ready. I don't have the equipment. I don't have a camera. I don't have a mic. I don't have, so I'm, of course, thinking of all the things that I don't have and why I shouldn't start or wouldn't be able to start at that time. But now, as I briefly mentioned, I'm in a totally different place. I've grown significantly, just looking back from that time in 2017 until now. And so the way I've reestablished my empowerment platform, which is what I dub it to be, I knew that this would be a good time for me to actually launch. And then getting into it, I did realize that it is way more work than I anticipated. And I was just I remember the first episode as I was editing it, because the recording itself came out to be maybe an hour and a half or something like that. And I was like, okay, this is new. I'm like, people are probably not even going to want to listen to this long. So I know I'm going to have to break this up. And then, of course, there were, the other little parts and things that I said or did in between that needs to be cut. And as I started to edit the audio, I was like, oh no, I don't understand. And then I see how now people actually record themselves and put out the post. And I remember how difficult it was editing my YouTube channel videos. So to think that people actually edit, or, I don't know if they do, but they have video clips of their podcast and produce the audio of a podcast is kudos to you, because all that work,
I agree.
I'm not for it.
Did you have any background in editing audio and video?
No.
Did you have any background in utilizing software to do that?
My only background was what I learned in school doing, the classes, taking Microsoft Word class or whatever. And, but I've always been creatively inclined. So I've always enjoyed creating things. And so honestly, the editing part, especially when I was doing my YouTube channel, it wasn't really a work or something that I saw is oh, it's a challenge and it makes me not want to do it. It drew me in more once I
Okay.
actually started to. Because I just always loved to create. So I was creating my thumbnails. I was, designing the graphics and all of that stuff. Like I was so invested. And so, but it did take a lot of time. I mean, a video that
Right.
might have been 30 minutes, same with, the podcast audio, it can take 2-3 hours to edit it,
Absolutely. And what you just said is the reason why I started the podcast, because it's so much untapped talent, which I consider, your creativity, and we'll get into the procrastination thing, because you thought about what you wanted to do and you did it. But your creativity, is so many people that have that creativity and just don't know how or what to do in order to push forward with, their visions and what they would like to do. And if you have that thought process that you want to start a podcast, I think there's different levels to consider when you start talking about procrastination. Because if you don't know anything at all, you can start a podcast.
Right.
But there's so much work that you have to do after that recording. Like, you have to put work in to do the podcast itself, to get ready for guests if you're going to have it, or whatever that episode covers. And then even once you do the recording, after the post-production, there's so much stuff that needs to be done. Like, that's where the work really begins, the marketing and promotion and everything else. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. The work really begins. Like, it's like, okay, anybody can just pick up the phone and press record and start talking. Anybody can literally do that. But the work that goes in afterwards, the promotion that has to come for you to get people to listen to the podcast, all of that, you have to be willing to do that. And that's what I mean by, like, although it is a challenge, it doesn't turn me off, because I, like, in my scope, I see it as me. This is more creating, though, so it doesn't feel like I'm working like super hard. It feels like I'm doing something that I enjoy. Right. Nice, and even in learning it and figuring it out, I'm enjoying that part too, because now I'm learning something new. I'm gaining a new skill set. Right. Like you asked about, like, the YouTube videos. I never edited a video in my life, but thank God for what is that? Adobe Premiere Pro. And I dived in and looked at other YouTube videos of how to, what keys to press, how to cut and, pull this part out, how to stretch it out, get specific. Like, I watched the videos and I had to invest that time to learn the skill, although I had already been, starting in the craft. And I think that sometimes that's the part that people miss, is that they get into it. And then when they realize how difficult it is, it's like, oh, well, I don't feel like doing that extra step to really get into the groove or to really develop the skill. They want to just be able to start and just have it automatically, and that be that. And that's most of the time, that's not the case. Right.
And with today's technology, though, like, it has grown so much, it has opened up, the avenue for people with creative juices to actually get material out or content. And that's why you have so many creative people coming out now. And so that goes into procrastination. Like, you really don't have a reason to not, like, if you wanted to start a podcast, not start a podcast or anything on a creative aspect because of today's technology, or even if you don't have the resources to do it, there's so many people that have the resources that you can link up with in order to do that. But I wanted to go in now that you've started your podcast. Mm-hmm. Like, exactly what is your podcast about? Like,
so, and being totally honest, I struggle with, like, picking, like, one specific thing, like, I'm going to tackle this. So when I say that empowerment is what I love the most, that is what I focus my entire platform around. And I would say, like, that is what my podcast is about, to provide people. And I define empowerment by providing people with information, tools, or knowledge that will provide them with a new skill set or some new information that's going to allow them to tap into that power they have within them to do what it is that they know they should be doing, or do what it is they need to do. So that is my goal with every platform. across all my platforms. And so specifically with the podcast, I was like, okay, this gives me an opportunity to be more vulnerable and transparent, because we have a lack of authenticity with a lot of the things that we have now in our society. And I wanted to make sure that it would be authentic and I would be open to being vulnerable and transparent, because those experiences that I had that may not have been so great, or even some of the great things, could definitely benefit and help somebody else. So when I say it's the topics is, about mind, body, spirit, right? The health and the synchronicity of all three of those things, mind, body, and spirit, they all go together. They're all essential. And our culture too, because guess what? We're living life. We're dealing with all kinds of things today. And I got something to say about it. So I'm going to share it,
Yeah, that would be an interesting statistic. Specifically, what's the numbers since the pandemic, though? I know I gave some numbers for over the last 3 years, but specifically because of the pandemic, podcasts and some of the other things, like we've changed course because of this pandemic in so many ways. And so, I think the podcast is part of that also. People had more time. Yeah.
People are definitely getting into podcasts a whole lot more. I mean, and they're all over on everything you can think of. There's a podcast for it.
Right. All right. So I was looking at the episodes you have, and Time to Lighten Up was your initial one.
Yes.
And then your third one, Reflections of a New Podcaster. And the one I took interest in, and the one I want to kind of go over. And I encourage people to go check. Look, I got to look at the name again. Royally Empowered Podcast. I access it through Spotify. Is there other platforms they can get that on? Do you know?
Yeah. So the platform that I'm using is Anchor, and it progressively will begin to submit it to be on different platforms. So I would have to go in. I haven't checked just yet, just because I'm only 3 episodes in. I'm not sure how many. I can't recall the parameters right now for it to start going, but it'll eventually be on Google and, Apple Podcasts and all that stuff.
All right. And like I said, the one I took interest in is your second episode, Procrasti-Prep, Procrastination Preparation.
Yeah.
So I'll before I chime in, I'll let you give a brief synopsis of what that episode's about.
So I initially came up with it because procrastination preparation was what I dubbed my behavior. As I mentioned, I had previously thought of coming up with the podcast, or came up with the idea of the podcast in 2017. Wrote out episodes, had bullet points, did outlines, started creating artwork, came up with a name. I did all this preparation for it, but I kept thinking different things to myself to prevent myself from actually starting. That stopped me from actually doing it. So although I could have, right? And I even mentioned in the episode, there's no telling what my podcast would be like now, right? At a time when it wasn't maybe so popular to have a podcast, had I started then.
So that was the same for me. I had the podcast, I guess, vision leading into the pandemic. So it was right prior to the pandemic. We had got together. I got together with just having the idea with the people I thought would be interesting to have on the podcast, and then maybe linking up with other people. So to get in the room, get some mics together, and have a conversation about things. And then the pandemic hit. It was like, time out. Like, how is this going to work? And then that's, again, technology. You start seeing more Zoom and the video conferencing on interviews and different things related to linking up and trying to, have discussions. And that's work related. My job, they started improving with that so you can have meetings. And I mean, I still don't know what the overall change or the new norm is after we officially come out of the pandemic, but I know it will never be the same again, regardless of how much they try to go back to that.
Yes.
But back to procrastination. Definition of procrastination: to put off till another day or time, delay or defer. And so my initial thought, like I've always thought about procrastination, and I think it's different levels of procrastination. So I think the first one is, if you're not doing nothing at all, you should not have any excuses to not be doing something. If you're not getting anything accomplished, no matter what you could do or want to do, you're procrastinating. Like we can get in all kind of definitions. You're just lazy or whatever you want to call it. You should be doing something. Everybody, I think, has some type of creativity that they can be accomplishing, whether they believe in having a 9 to 5 or no matter what it is. So that's the first level. I think after that first level, if you do have things in motion, I think there's a fine line between procrastination and, just choosing what you want to do. So for example, if you tell somebody that you wanted to start the podcast, but you never did, if you never told that person and it was only your thought, is it really procrastination? Is it only procrastination when other people know and it never gets done? And then they say, hey, where's the podcast? Or is it still procrastination if you have that thought to say, hey, I'm gonna start a podcast, and you never tell anybody else, and then it never happens, or you do the necessary work that leads into you actually finally starting it, and then people say, hey, wow, you did that overnight. No, you didn't do it overnight. You grew and you had to prepare for it. So where are you at on that aspect of procrastination overall?
I would say that, and then just to be clear, so you're asking like, where am I at on that scale as you just defined, or like, where am I at as far as what procrastination is? Like, how do I define it?
Yeah, where were you, or what was your discussion within that episode you had, and then on my parameters on how I laid it out?
Okay, so in the episode, that was back when I was talking about back when I had been doing all this preparing, and I did share it with like a few people, but I had started to write outlines and ideas. I had done the same thing when I launched my YouTube channel. I had already came up with like a few of the episode topics and, a few outlines, but that's just how I operate. Like, I'm a person where I like to have things written down, put it on a schedule, write it, break it down into bullet points, have an outline like for almost everything.
I'm the same way. So it's nothing wrong with that. So go ahead.
Right. And there's nothing wrong with it. However, when I mentioned it on the episode, it was like, I would plan until there was really nothing left to be planning.
Okay.
Like, it's like, I'm going to think of something else that I can do to delay me actually taking that first step, because I don't really want to take that first step.
Okay.
Because I'm scared for X, Y, and Z reasons. So what else can I do? Oh, I'm going to find somebody who already doing it, and I'm going to learn from them. Meanwhile, yes, I'm learning from them, and that is beneficial in certain aspects, especially when you can find somebody who's already, well into the craft or whatever it is you aspire to do. But are you not still delaying what you could be doing? Could you still be taking that course and have already at least launched and did your first episode? Absolutely. But I thought, well, if I do this and then I'll get back to that, then it'll make me better to do that. But then after I did that, okay, well, let me think of something else because I'm still not ready. I need something else, right? I must be missing something.
That kind of rolls into fear of the unknown also. But go ahead. You can finish up.
Right. And so I guess to your point, the way you broke it down, I was that person who I did start telling people. So then because I wasn't doing it, that, kind of made me feel a little shameful because now I'm talking about something and I ain't doing it. And we all know people say, oh, it's a lot of people, they talk about it, but they ain't doing nothing. Right. And I'm like, I don't want to be that person. So now I'm feeling a little shameful, a little guilty, like, oh, I said I was going to do this, but I ain't do that. And then, like I said, also, and just like, at one point I did just let it all go and just like, all right, I ain't doing nothing.
Okay.
So It definitely was like maybe a combination of like maybe 2 out of the 3 ways like you broke it down and explained it. Yeah.
Okay. So what finally put you over the hump to say, I'm gonna do it. This is it.
What really I experienced, like, I mean, and I know this pandemic has hit everybody strong in a totally different way. And it really took me through one of the most emotionally unstable times of my life. And I finally arrived at a place where I was able to just surrender all of it. I previously I was like perpetually just hopeless and despondent and just I didn't want to do anything. And I mean, this was as recent as this past November, December,
Wow, okay.
really up until like this February. And I briefly discussed it in episode 1. I go a little bit more in depth just about where I had been prior to relaunching my online platforms, my Instagram, my YouTube channel, and now the podcast. I was just in a really deep, like dark place. And I finally was just like, I don't want to feel like this anymore. Like I finally got tired of me being in that mindset, being in that space. And so I prayed and I went to God and I was just like, okay, God, like obviously all the things I wanted to do my way don't work. My way is not working. Nothing that I have done in the way that I thought I wanted it to do, like none of it has been able to follow through. So this time I'm giving up all this stuff, all this emotional baggage, all the things that I say to myself to shame myself, to beat up on myself. I'm surrendering all of that and I'm submitting myself 100% to you. And I took that time. At that point, that was this past February. And ever since then, I've been focused on just developing and growing spiritually, focusing on my relationship with God. And as I have, my whole being has evolved. Okay. And I was like, now this is the time. Now I'm properly prepared and positioned to deliver and offer so much more. And not that I wasn't before, but being in a much more solid and secure place within myself, I know that I'm able to pour out because I'm connected now to my resource to constantly be able to pour and be poured into and be able to really share that experience and so much more with other people.
Okay. I kind of feel what you were saying, based on what I've heard already. And yeah, I feel you. Like it feels like you really, you really have some, what I want to say, some, I don't want to say spiritual, but like you're not just doing a podcast just to do it. You have some purpose behind it, and I can feel that. Yeah.
You know it, and that's a perfect way to sum it up. That's exactly what it is. I am finally in my purpose. I had always envisioned it. I'd always thought about it, and I knew that speaking and being on, like having a platform was a part of my purpose and like the highlight of it. Like eventually I want to expand into being like, doing motivational speaking, but I wasn't actually in it and doing it. And now I am in my purpose and doing it, living it. It's no longer just my vision. Yeah.
And so I know we talked a little bit offline before doing this recording. And so what's some of the other things you had going or visually want to begin down the line in the future? I know you talked a little bit about it.
Yeah.
Getting involved in empowering, but what's some of the other things you were doing and still would like to bring back to light?
So some of the things that I had previously done in college, you briefly mentioned I am an HBCU grad. Shout out to all the HBCU grads out there. I'm such an advocate for HBCUs. It's so important. But in college, I had established a young women's mentor organization which at that time, the Bad Girls Club, which was a popular TV show, was still like out and popping then. And we decided to revamp what it meant to be bad as a woman for young women at that time. And we wanted to establish a college campus or become a college campus organization. That route didn't work out. And it ultimately led us to becoming a nonprofit organization within the state of Georgia. And we worked on that. You know, we attempted to work with some of the local schools there, but they were like, you know, we already have programs. And so, again, with women's empowerment being the highlight of establishing that organization, and the fact that there were a lot of fights and unnecessary things happening amongst the young women on campus, everybody was like, Jasmine, like, you should start something. And I was thinking about it, and they were like, yeah, no, like you should. And so we did. And although we didn't become a campus organization, we actually got 4 other girls on our campus to produce a YouTube series called The Ladies Room, where we talked about different topics that impacted women, and they shared their perspectives on it. It was almost like a college version of The Real. That was like our goal behind it, just because we weren't able to do the campus thing. We weren't able to work in some of the local schools. So we found the YouTube series, the Ladies Room, to be just another avenue for us to still fulfill our goal, which was to help empower and encourage young women to be more intentional about working together instead of always fighting one another, because we have so much more power when we work together, especially as women, than we do when we fight with one another. And so that was that in college, and I, continually progressed that. And then,
so did y'all record anything with that?
Yes, we did. We actually recorded, I believe we have about 4 episodes, and it's out there on YouTube somewhere.
What was the name of it?
It was called The Ladies Room, and it was on, we titled the channel Bad Girls TV. So it was BADDGIRLZINC, Bad Girls Inc. Bad Girls Inc. TV was the name of the YouTube channel. And then the show was produced on the YouTube channel, The Ladies Room. And so it's still out there. We never took the page down or anything like that. But just because, of course, being in college, each of the girls who were hosting the show, they were at different levels in their college careers. So eventually we just couldn't keep it going. And then I got into my senior year. And so then the grind really started. And I was like, okay, we got to shut all this down. We're not going to be able to make this happen. And I was, being active and doing other things. I was just like, okay, we got to put a hold on things. But that my heart for mentorship never left me. And so that's something that I will be taking into the future. I also previously, I did mention the other podcast, which I hosted with actually one of my college friends. Her name was Leah Davis, and she and I started the ER, which was the Empowerment Room, was the name of that podcast. And I believe,
did y'all have any episodes of that completed?
We did. We produced, I believe it was 2 episodes of that podcast on Spotify, because we use the same platform that I'm using now for Royally Empowered Podcast. And then she and I even got so deep into it at one point, because it was actually, we produced the Empowerment Room when the pandemic first happened. I was actually at her house when they announced the shutdown, and I was at her house for the first 2 weeks of the shutdown. And while I was there, that's when we developed all of this. And then we also did, we titled ourselves the Empowerment Doctors, right? Because she and I had both been biology majors in college, and of course had the aspirations or thinking that at that time when we were going into college, we were going to be doctors. And, we had, the whole vision and things. And obviously God changed that whole direction for both of us. So we was like, okay, the Empowerment Doctors, this is what we're going to do. And we had our Instagram set up. And then we even produced a, what is that called? We did a course. We made our own course on Teachable. And we called it the Power Clinic. It was the name of the course. And we had 7 different lessons within the course that we came up with. Like all of that we did in those first 2 weeks that I was staying at her house when the pandemic started. And so all the things that I've done, even down to the jobs that I've had, because I've had several jobs since college.
That's normal.
It's right. And that's the thing, I'm learning, some of the things that I was so disappointed in myself about, I'm learning, no, this is normal. This is what happens. But I can look at each position I've had and see how it's contributed to where I'm at now, or how it contributes to the information that I provide now on my platforms and different things like that. So I'm just grateful to be where I am now and just be able to take in all that I have learned, and then now flipping it into something that I can now share and produce to, help other people.
Right. Nice. Okay. And I'm always available, or this platform is always available. Let's make sure we stay in touch and
absolutely.
Yeah. Encourage. I hope this encourages other people to kind of tackle their fears of the unknown or stop procrastinating. Mm-hmm. But it's still a thin line. As long as you're making movement or moving forward with life as a whole, I believe. Like, as long as you're doing things to get better, continuing to go to school, or, you may not have a job that you want, but as long as you're working, try to volunteer and you do those type of things. Again, hopefully I feel inspired by listening to the episode I did listen to on your podcast. Mm-hmm. And I think you're doing a good job. Like, I'm glad I had you. And I didn't say the link we had with Mr. Larry.
Yeah.
Who referred me to you.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful for it. I am so grateful for it. I truly am.
And I'm still working on, like, I feel like I'm saying too much. Like, I'm working on these things. Mm-hmm, and as I go, I'm going to get better at it. And I plan to try and give a little bit more insight on where my mindset is with a lot of things or whatever. But I'm more interested in the guests right now and what they have to say. Mm-hmm. And before I close out, is there any closing thoughts you want to add?
I just want to encourage anybody who wants to start anything, whether it's a podcast, you have a new business idea, and even if it's something that you think, and only because this is coming to mind now, sometimes we think that, someone else is already doing that, so I'm not going to do it either. Do it anyway, because you're producing your idea. Your idea is going to be different from theirs. Your passion, your purpose, your reason behind doing it is different from theirs. Your mission, your vision for doing it is different from theirs, right? And so the world needs what it is you have to produce in that particular arena, whatever it is you want to start. And anything that you're unsure about, I will close with this. Pray about it. Be persistent, right? Prepare for it. Pray about it. Prepare for it. Be persistent in your pursuit, and you will prosper in it. Pray, prepare, pursue, persist, and you will prosper every single time.
Nice. Royally Empowered is the name of the podcast. This is Jasmine. Now say your hook in the middle there again.
Empress Rossi.
Empress Rossi Ross.
Yes. So
Jasmine
real quick,
Ross.
I came up with that because I chose to name my audience when I started my YouTube channel, and I've just hung on to that ever since. So I call my audience the Royals, right? As again, just to reinforce and empower people, your royalty. And so I say the Royals, royally empowered. That's where all that comes from. And then I call myself Empress Rossi, and that's why. Yeah, that's where the whole thing comes from. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. That's now we know.
Now we know.
And so I don't want to make sure if I did miss anything or any other links related to Royally Empowered Podcast, check that out at the end. I'll have that posted. Check the Sean Collins contribution out on YouTube. It's available on all platforms in the podcast format: Apple, Google, Spotify, etc. And it was a joy having you. Thank you for coming on.
Having me.
I'm glad you came. Again, keep me in mind in the future, because I'll definitely have you on maybe for other subjects and other things we talk about. But again, this is a millennial and making moves and having her own podcast and moving forward in life. She didn't let anything hold her back. She had a setback here and there, but the podcast has sprung from that episode in your life, and I'm glad you did it. Keep it going, don't stop, and don't let anybody stop you. Appreciate you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a nice one. Thanks for listening to the Sean Collins Contribution Podcast with your host, Sean, and special guest, Empress Rossi. We hope you enjoyed our discussion on Empress Rossi's new podcast titled Royally Empowered. Please go to the website www.unclesean.com. That's www.unclesean.com for additional podcast information and links. Also check out and contribute to #The Sean Collins Contribution. Join me for future episodes with interesting discussions surrounding health and wellness, new artists, global perspectives, and so much more. Until next time, peace. Before I get to today's guest, I'm going to start over because I wanted to make sure I did something before that. So, Jasmine, Empress Rossi, is it? Wait, turn your volume on.
Yes, Empress Rossi.
Empress Rossi.
U-S-E, that's what it's on. Sean Entertainment be the name.